Okay, so for the first question, we are asked to draw a network diagram, and we're given the following activities for that network diagram. So when doing your network diagram, the first thing you need to do is draw your start block, and you need to also have an end block, right? And then the first activities we're going to look for are activities with no immediate predecessor, so activities A, B, and C. We're going to look at those first, and we're given the duration of each activity, right? So what I like to do is draw the duration in brackets just so that I can keep track of things. So from our start block, right, from our start block, we're going to move, and then we're going to go to activity A, which has a duration of 1, activity B, which has a duration of 4, activity C, which has a duration of 2, right? And then the starting date, I guess, for each of these activities is going to be the same as the end date of our start block. So all of these are going to start on month 0, and then since A has a duration of 1, we're going to say 0 plus 1. That's going to give us an end of 1, so it's going to end at month 1. And then the same for activity B, duration of 4, so we're going to add 4 to the 0. We're going to get an end date of month 4. And then for activity C, we add 2 to the 0, so then we're going to get an end date of 2. Then our next activity is activity D, which depends on activity B. You can see that activity E and F also depend on activity B, so we're going to do those next. So from activity B, we're going to branch out into activity D, E, and F, and then all of these will have the same start date of 4. So as soon as we complete activity B on the 4th month, we're going to start these next activities, right? And each of them have their own duration, right? So activity D has a duration of 2, then E has a duration of 1, F has a duration of 3. Cool. So we account for those. So 4 plus 2, 6, 4 plus 1, 5, 4 plus 3, 7. Cool. And then after that, we go to activity G, which depends on both activity A and activity D. So G over here, we're going to connect A to that, and we're going to connect D to it. So for our start value, we're going to choose the highest number between activity A and D. Reason being is because we need to finish both activity A and activity D before we can start activity G. If we chose a start of month 1 for activity G, that will mean that we're starting activity G without having completed activity D. Hopefully that makes sense. So yeah, if it doesn't, just remember, choose a higher number. Sure. And then for the next one, activity H, that depends on C and F. So if we go to activity H, depends on activity C, depends on activity F. Again, we have to choose the higher number between the two, because we have to finish both activity C and activity F before we can start activity H. And then yeah, you carry on like that all the way throughout, and then you're going to get to a point where you have activity M with no connection. So after activity M, there's no activity that requires it as a predecessor, right? And the same for activity J. So you can see over here, there's no activity that requires activity J as a predecessor or activity M. So we need to connect these two activities to an end block, right? So connect activity J to the end block, activity M to the end block, and then again we choose the highest number between the two to signal the start of the end. So both the start and the end blocks have a duration of 0, so the early start, early finish are going to be the same. Okay, so once you've done that, then we can start filling in the late finish and the late start, right? So you first do all your activities and you do your forward pass, which is these numbers on the top. Then once you're done with that, then you go to the pink numbers at the bottom. So because we're not given that the project is going to be delayed by a certain amount, so for example, if they told us that the project was going to be or could be delayed by, I don't know, 6 months, for example, then this latest start and latest finish of the project, you'd add 6 to that, right? So you could delay the project for 6 months, so that would become 22 plus 6, which would be 28, right? But in this case, we're not given anything, so we're going to assume that the latest that the project can be finished is within 22 months, right? So we're going to work backwards. So we've established this 22 over here, and we're going to copy and paste that over here. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to take this 22 and we're going to minus however, we're going to minus the duration. We're going to, minus the duration by that number. Is that the correct order? I don't know. But 22 minus the duration to get this number, right? So 22 minus 0, there's no duration, gives 22. And then this 22 that's over here, we're going to put it here and we're going to put it here. So it's not going to change, right? The latest finish for this activity is going to be the latest start for this activity, right? And that goes in both cases, right? So this number goes there and there. And then let's follow this path over here. So for M, our duration is 7, so 22 minus 7, 15. And then we're going to take this 15 and we're going to put it there, we're going to put it there. So then for K, it's going to be 15 minus 5, 10. Then over here, we have it branching out. So we're going to follow that one. So it goes to activity H. And then it also goes to activity E. And then it also goes to activity G, right? So this 10 will go there. This 10 will go there. And this 10 will go there. But one thing to consider when doing the backwards pass, you need to look at all the connections associated with a specific activity. So for example, activity H over here, we could have done, well, we kind of looked at it already, where we go back from activity K to activity H. So we could have automatically put the 10 there, but we didn't consider activity J. So you can see that H is also connected to activity J. So which one do we choose? Do we choose 16 or do we choose 10? So we need to choose the smaller number. Reason being, this is the late finish, right? So if you chose 16 as the late finish, then that would mean that the latest time we start activity 10 would be before we actually finish activity H. So this number can't be higher than any of these two numbers. So you always choose the lower number. So in summary, when you're working forward, when you're working with the numbers at the top, choose the larger number. When you're working with the numbers at the bottom, choose the lower number. Okay, and then one way to kind of make it easier to follow the path and stuff, because it's hard to so for example, going back to K, so it's hard to see this path as well. So go to the activity that you want to investigate, I guess, and then trace out its connections. So you can see it's connected to that. So one of the potential late finishes for activity H is 16. And then another potential late finish is 10. Okay, hope that makes sense. And then you work your way back using that method, I guess. Work your way back, fill it in for all the examples and for all the activities, and you should get a start of 0. So the total float for your start and your end should always be the same. So total float is going to be this number here minus that one, or it could be this one minus that one. Either one doesn't matter. They should be the same. If they're not, you made a mistake. and they should be the same for each activity. So for example, 22 minus 22, that's 0. 15 minus 15, that's 0. If this minus this and this minus this is not the same, then you made a mistake somewhere, right? Reason being is because here you add the duration and here you subtract the duration, so they should be equal. Anyways, the total float for the end should always equal the total float of the start. If they're not equal, then you made a mistake somewhere, probably with your backwards pass or forwards pass. And then, cool. Then we're also asked to determine the critical path. So one rule with the critical path is that the free float must always be 0. So, for example, going from the start block to any one of these activities, the critical path will be the path where there can't be any delays, right? So starting from there to there, we can see that these two dates are the same, right? So in this case, any one of them could be the critical path, right? But another property of the critical path is that it's the one with the longest duration. So we go from there to there, because 4 is the larger number between these three, right? Also, if you look at activity A, right? So activity A leads into activity G. If you look over here, G starts on month 6 while activity A is set to end on month 1. You can delay activity A for a total of 5 months before you actually start activity G, and it won't end up delaying the project. So this part over here is not critical. You don't have to follow it strictly. So that's what's meant by critical, right? If this was critical, then you would have to finish activity A in time to keep the project within schedule. So this isn't the critical path. The easiest way to determine the critical path is start at the end and then start just subtracting numbers. So this minus this, that doesn't give you 0. So the critical path doesn't go this way. This minus this, 0. The critical path goes that way. That minus that, 0. Critical path goes that way. This minus this, that's not 0. Critical path doesn't go this way. And then you just keep working like that all the way back up until you reach the end. So yeah, that's the easiest way to determine the critical path. And then you can always do a sanity check and check that it's at the path with the longest duration. So yeah, going to here, we have 4, that's the longest one. From here to here, 7, that's the longest one. From here to here, month 10, that's the longest one. From there to there, 15, not the longest one because you have 16 on top here, but this 15 leads into 22, whereas this 16 leads to the end. So this is the longest path. Hope that makes sense. And then yeah, to calculate the total float, it's just this number minus that number. And then to calculate the free float, it's going to be, so for example, the free float for, let's do activity L, for example. So free float for activity L is going to be the successive early start, so the early start of the next activity subtracted by the early finish of the current activity. So 15 minus 9, that's going to be the free float for the activity L. Cool, hope that makes sense. And then for activity C, when calculating the free float for activity C, okay, so activity C is connected to H, and it's also connected to I, and it's also connected to J, right? So which one do we, no, it's not connected to J, no, it's just connected to H, just connected to I, sorry. So which one do we choose? which one do we minus by which one. You choose the one that's going to give you the smallest difference, if that makes sense. So we choose 5 minus 2, not 7 minus 2. So the free float, what it means is it means the amount of time you have before you start delaying the whole project, right? So we can spend, if you take the free float as 7 minus 2, then you're saying that you have 5 months, right, to delay project C. So we can delay project C, activity C, up to 5 months before we delay the whole project, right? But if you actually do that, then you'll see that you're going to be eating into the time needed to start this activity, and this activity can't start until this one is finished, so you end up delaying the whole project. So yeah, in short, choose the smallest difference. Yeah, hope that makes sense.